Because every company in this world with 5 billion potential users on the internet has to become a media company, period.
This is gold. There's a lot of good business stuff here, and we still haven't gotten deeper into some of the other topics. And
because radio audiences are far larger than cable, we had 4 times the audience of the Fox News channel.
Wow.
It's hard to believe.
Talk about a flex.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Liberty Spenders Podcast. We are your hosts, Kurt and Kristen Luidhardt, co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's helped raise over $500 million and help elect over 100 members of Congress, 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question: what if you could exponentially grow your business by tapping into a lucrative and engaged audience that we call Liberty Spenders? Now, we have identified them. They're 76.5 million, and they're looking to buy from businesses and brands that align with their values. If you want to learn more about this, you can get access to our new best-selling book at libertyspenders.com/free.
Our guest today I'm really excited about is Mark Masters, who's a national media entrepreneur, innovator, and strategist. He's a U.S.-based media CEO, technology entrepreneur with over 30 years of game-changing leadership in national media. He's driven innovation, quality, and profitability. He built top-tier radio networks and launched breakout shows like Fox News Radio, the fastest-growing syndicated news product in America. He's advised icons like GE's Jack Welch, Fox News' Roger Ailes, and even a former U.S. president.
We're scraping the bottom of the barrel here of his guests, so we tell you. It's like,
Yeah.
We're kidding.
He applied revolutionary strategies inspired by quality pioneer W. Edwards Deming, and from 1988 to 2016 as CEO of multiple media companies. He grew top 10 syndicated talk shows and delivered a 49% annual revenue growth rate for 5 straight years.
Woo!
So this is the guy who knows how to make a media empire. We should be asking him to help us here at Liberty Spenders. In the meantime, we're excited to have Mark Masters on.
Welcome.
It's an honor.
Yeah, I was really excited when we had a chance to meet, Mark, and just to learn about all you've done. These are, Fox News is something I grew up on. I probably wouldn't be in politics today had it not been for Fox News and Roger Ailes and some of the shows you've built. What was it like contributing to that, helping start it from scratch, and what were some of the early wins that helped shape all of it?
Well, I got a call from Roger Ailes out of the blue one day, and this was in 2002. And my secretary told me, she says, Roger Ailes is on the line. I says, it's probably Hannity messing with me, because Hannity was is a very good friend of mine. I built a house, my first house, as a journeyman carpenter at 18 with Sean's brother-in-law, which is his producer, Sweet Baby James. And that's where Teddy and James met 42 years ago. And then Sean grew up listening to my father on radio, and my father, he got into radio because of my father, lost his first job interviewing my father on college campus. That's Sean Hannity. But I thought Sean was messing with me, right? Because Sean and I would talk all the time. Roger Ailes was somebody I never thought I'd ever talk to. And on the phone call comes in. I pick up the phone. I think it's Sean messing with me, or he's having somebody call me to mess with me. And I say, if this is Roger Ailes, tell me 3 things that makes me believe it, because I don't believe it.
Prove it.
And he says something about, I hate communism and something, and these little stories. And I'm like, it's really him.
Wow.
And I'm like, I always wanted to meet him because I just thought he was sort of legendary. Even in 2002, 23 years ago, he's legendary. So he says to me, I want to take I want to take Fox News Radio, and I want to take it away from Westwood One, which also syndicates CBS. And he says, I want to do something in-house. Can you help me? And I says, well, why are you calling me? And he says, well, everyone I talk to says you're the only guy that builds companies, that builds networks from the ground up. No one does it. And you have all the top. I had 7 of the top. I built 7 of the 10 largest syndicated talk shows in America which still is a record, more than all other companies combined, because I couldn't get fired because I owned the company. So if my wife wanted to fire me, she could deal with Michael Savage or Laura Ingraham or any of these other people, right? So I said, Roger, Fox News Radio does not exist. Are you aware of that? And he said, what do you mean? I said, Fox News Radio doesn't exist. Who are you with? He says, well, Westwood One. I says, Roger, pull up your screen. Do you have a screen? Go to Westwood One. So he pulls up the screen. And I only know him for 5 minutes. I says, that's your syndicator, right? And he says, yeah, that's them. I says, they're paying you for something. What is it? And he says, well, they have the rights. I says, and they're paying you a lot of money, right? And he says, yes. I says, click up there. He says, what's that? I says, that's who they syndicate. That's CNN. And there was this silence. I said, they have 1,100 CNN radio affiliates, and they've bought the license for Fox News Radio to prevent Fox News Radio from existing. They pay you a rights fee, and they protect CNN syndication with your rights fee. And he got so mad. And I said, I'm not saying this to be mean. So I said, I'm just telling you that you're not in radio. Well, what do? I said, get the rights back and I'll help you. Whatever you need. I said, it's because of you that my children aren't speaking Mandarin right now. And I know that what you did for Reagan. I know what you've done for this country. You've given an equal voice to the other 55% of the country. And God bless you for it. He said, what do I pay you? I said, $1 a month or whatever you think I'm worth, but no less than $1. And so I flew in, I came up with a plan. And he said, because back then you had to pay something called compensation to the top tier radio stations like WABC and those others, because ABC Radio News and CBS Radio News were very well established 70, 80-year-old news brands. Who's going to launch a national news brand in radio? This is an untold story. So I was the biggest independent in the United States. I developed the biggest shows in the United States, and people trusted me because I wasn't a big conglomerate, and I would never be disloyal to my stations when I was pressured to move to a bigger group. We aired 3,200 stations a day live across 4 networks, 22 syndicated shows, 7 of the 10 biggest. And we actually had, because radio audiences are far larger than cable, we had 4 times the audience of the Fox News channel.
Wow.
It's hard to believe.
Talk about a flex.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that here's the whole premise on which Roger Ailes built Fox News. Roger Ailes syndicated Rush Limbaugh's nighttime show back in 1991, 92, somewhere around there. And what he discovered was something fascinating. Rush would talk about his nighttime show in the daytime. And he gave him some of the biggest nighttime numbers. And Roger watched Rush transplant the vast audiences of radio into the very much smaller audiences of nighttime TV. But when you transfer that volume, you can actually artificially create an echo rating in television that makes it any network number one or any top show number one if you do it often enough. And it is recycling one medium's audience, radio, into another medium's audience, television. And Roger started looking at this and going, my God, half the country is underserved because it's ignored by the coastal elite. What if I can just take Rush Limbaugh's audience, just Rush Limbaugh's, 50 million people a week, and I can take 20% of that? If I can show visuals on television, there's an underserved audience in television that is overserved in radio. And the reason it's overserved in radio is because television thinks they are so unworthy and so unintelligent, they don't exist. Basically, these are Christian working people that the media had contempt for. And Roger discovered that audience in another audience medium. But when he realized that if he could just put more visuals, prettier visuals of things Rush discussed, all he needed to do was take his friend Rush Limbaugh and get his friend Rush Limbaugh, watch this, to transfer 20% of his audience, and 20% of Rush's audience, of one radio show's audience, would make Fox News Channel a top 10 cable network. And so what Fox News became was, in a sense, a prep service for the Rush Limbaugh show. Because if they prepped to Rush's interests, Rush would talk about about Fox, and every single time Rush talked about Fox for more than a minute, that was equivalent to maybe $500,000 or let's say $100,000 of free earned media promotion for the news channel. So Roger used the news channel to prep and super serve Rush Limbaugh. This is my view. He never told me this. He told me the strategy, but I went deeper as I knew him for 15 years and I became his personal media advisor. This transference by understanding an underserved audience in television and serving an underserved audience, he gave voice to half the country that were frustrated that we're only finding that sort of programming on radio. And that's what I do. I actually find a way to transfer priceless earned media into brands and to companies, or to grow the size of audiences for media companies to cross-collateralize the value of earned media directly into a brand. And you can build a billion-dollar company brand like Breitbart in 3 months with the right story if you hijack the news cycle. So anyway, that's a little bit about Roger Ailes and how I met him and what it turned into. But I could tell you more about. I built the Fox News radio division in 5 months, which should have taken 5 years.
Wow!
By doing some very basic, principled entrepreneurial stuff that isn't media related at all, and I could share that with you if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll tell you. I want to say a personal story though before we go on, which is there was a young, super nerdy high school student who was not allowed to stay up past, 9:30, 10 o'clock, who was recording every Rush Limbaugh late night TV show on a VHS tape and then waking up early, which I was allowed to do before 6 a.m. so I could watch it before I had to leave for school. And really, I've always said that it was Rush that got me interested in current events and politics. And so I know which Roger was speaking of, and what you're speaking of is that's what really captured my imagination was the TV show. When I was in high school, of course, I'm probably the only high school kid.
That tells you everything you need to know about Kurt.
Rush was the inevitable force of creation and thought liberation, right? He democratized common sense. And common sense used to be preserved for CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, but he democratized it. And when I first heard Rush, I was a building contractor. I built one of the largest real estate companies by the time I was 25 years old in the state of Oregon. And all my guys on my work sites all listened to Rush. Every single place I went, Rush Limbaugh was on, and there would be Rush rooms. And so you'd go to a place that played Rush at noon, and they record it and play it at noon if it was a different time zone. And people would go there to eat, and it would increase the populations of lunch people at restaurants. But it was a phenomenon, and it goes like in this order. Ronald Reagan put aside the fairness doctrine that made Rush possible in 1988, 1989. And Rush made Trump possible, in my opinion, because Rush democratized and made what Trump is talking about as common sense. Rush made it permissible for conservatives and Christians to actually have an opinion about politics.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who grew up in that era, I think now, because it feels like a long time ago, I think some people don't appreciate just how much a phenomenon that Rush was and how, and I mean, you skipped right from Rush to Trump, but I mean, without Rush Limbaugh, there's probably not a lot of the media. There's no Tucker Carlson. There's no
Trump. There's no Fox News without Rush. There's no Fox News without Rush. And honestly, Trump would have been fine. Trump was the most powerful show with a celebrity apprentice with the highest revenue, the best revenue model in all of television. And Roger was very scared of Bob Wright at NBC suing Rupert and Roger for tortious interference with Trump's celebrity apprentice contract. So that's the reason why I went over to see Trump in 2011, because Roger Roger wanted to help him, but because Roger trusted me, he says, you're the guy that should go over there because you're a contractor for Fox News, but you don't work for us. And you can talk to Trump about his aspirations. And when I went to him, it was supposed to be a 15-minute hello because we both had construction backgrounds and we both had media backgrounds, which is pretty rare, right? Who has a construction background? And we both did. And so Trump looked at ratings as votes. And I never thought of it that way. And I said to him, it turned into a 2-hour meeting. And he was such a wonderful, affable, humble. I mean, humble. It's weird. But I found him to be a lovely human being. And I came and I said, look, at that time, this was 2 weeks after he had basically forced Obama's hand. And Obama had to give his birth certificate. And Trump made an announcement taking credit for this, right? And I watched it with curiosity because I'm thinking to myself, because I knew what Roger wanted to help him. And I knew when I met him, I'd want to talk about it. So when I first met him, I said, look, I understand you might want to run in 2012 against Obama. And I said, I think you'd make an incredible president because you're an entrepreneur. And I don't remember the last time we had one, if we ever had one, that could run this place like a real country. I says, but you have to be, it seems to me like you're just against Obama. I get what you did. I think half the country, let's say 25% of the country always suspected the birth certificate thing. I says, but you need 53% of the population to vote for you, which means you need another 28% above the 25% that like you for being against him for you to be for something. Because when you're for something that's innovative and creates more freedom and more income and more personal liberty and invites the spirit of and the blessings of Christ's sovereignty over the country. I didn't put it in that strong of terms, but I do believe this is a blessed country because it follows Christ's principles.
Right.
And I says, the only way you could do that is by having a platform for what you're for and forcing the bad guys to be against what you're for. And if you can frame what you're for well enough, you can force them to be against something no one will support them in being against. And you will collapse their side by defining and framing your argument in just the perfect way. And he says, well, what do you mean? I says, well, I have some things that if you were a host and I was trying to get ratings, I'll talk to you as a host. If you were a host and trying to get ratings and I wanted to say, what are the 10 topics that matter most to the broadest amount of audience to grow your audience fast enough? And I'm not talking politics, just ratings. And he liked that because he and Mark Burnett had been doing the Apprentice and watching minute by minute ratings for years. I said, what I would give you is the top 10 emotional buttons that people can't express. They can't put into words and they need someone to express on their behalf in such a good way that people feel a catharsis, a little emotional moment of, I always knew I knew that, but
Yep.
he said it. And now I know why I know that. And it's validating and it makes them love you. So if you can say it in that way, that validates their inner voice, that's what Rush does. It's exactly what Rush does. Trump does exactly what Rush does as I think about it. So I started rattling off 10 things that I thought would be the top 10 ways of getting broadest ratings for shows. And he says, I like that. I says, if you want, you could put that into a Trump contract with America. And so he says, well, will you do that for me? I says, I'm just a lowly syndicator. I run a network. I'm not a political guy. He says, Mark, you're a builder. I says, yeah. He says, you know the media business, you built it. You didn't come in it through the normal corporate means or you wouldn't have done any of the things you've done. I says, that's true. And you understand audience. All your shows are number one in their day part in the country. Well, except for one. And I can never go up against his day part. But I said, you're right. Okay. He says, I want you to write my platform. I said, why? He says, because ratings are votes. And you've just described the way to get the maximum ratings for the top topics. And one of those topics was tariff mirroring back in 2011. Tariff mirroring, exactly what he's doing now. The only thing that he hasn't done on that list so far is what I call repatriation of foreign of companies we've forced overseas through horrible tax policy to offer them a tax-free repatriation of all their capital as an apology for driving them out of our country. and to the American people for killing jobs because we drove them out, to invite them home as the prodigal son and say, we want you home. We love you, manufacturing. Come home. Zero taxes. If you are bivouacked and forced to create jobs in a communist country, you are welcome home. He's not right. He's raised that one. But of the 14 points I came up with for ratings increase, I created policies and positions that would resonate for radio hosts. He's done 13 of them, but I did that in 2011. So he was far reaching and far thinking. Even then, people think he's just impulsive. He's not. This guy's super genius and, thoughtful.
Yeah. People who we know, we've worked on the Trump campaigns, but we were always in more the fundraising space for digital. So we weren't dealing directly with the president or before he was president, but the people we know who have dealt with them one-on-one have all said the same thing. Right. And even Bill Maher now, right? In the last week, the cartoonish character that's built up by the media.
With his...
and with a little bit of his help, because he's a good media. He knows how to get ratings. I love that way you talk about it.
Be controversial.
Have said, no, on a one-to-one basis, you start figuring out, not only is he highly intelligent and highly capable, but also
genuinely humble and kind.
Connected.
Yes.
Present.
Present.
Very
curious, very open to being wrong, which is.
And we'll ask about your family, your children.
Yeah. Incredible.
Which is, really is, you would need that skill in order to actually negotiate and make deals.
But the media,
you can't just be tough guy all the time.
Yeah. Look, guys, the media, if you think about the media, if I could inject a Christian thought here, what does the media do? They don't have to lie if they just don't report the truth. You see, there's a difference.
Right.
If you minimize important stories and maximize murder trials is one tragedy. But there's 16 million, if there's 16 million vaccine deaths worldwide, what we're really saying, let's say there is 16 million vaccine-related deaths. I'm not saying there is. But if what I've read is verified by RFK, that's like as many people as died in World War II.
Right.
And I want you to think about, this doesn't even rate as a story in the trade tariff issue against China right now. It doesn't even rate as a notation. And you got to think about what that is. When you have evil lawyers in a courtroom drama, the evil lawyers don't have to lie if they can strike the evidence of innocence. And what evil does in this world is it's literally the spirit of chaos. So a friend of mine who's Catholic was praying with me the other day, and he said, I want to invite the spirit of shalom, peace, into this prayer. And I says, what's shalom, peace? Because my father was Jewish. I was raised in a very ethnic Jewish family. My father became a Messianic Jew, and I feel that way too, But I said, what is shalom, peace? Because I know shalom, he says, it literally means to break the spirit of chaos, right? What is chaos? Chaos is the absence of truth. Truth provides clarity and defines who you can believe. Because whether you like people or not, truth defines who you can believe. And if you have a choice between who you believe and what is true, you have to start with what is true. And that has to decide, that directs you who you believe. Because if what is true if who is true and telling you the truth is a person you don't like, you better be open to them. And if somebody's a liar, but you like them, you shouldn't just trust them, right? These are foundational principles. Anyway, what the media does is they purposely minimize the truth to such a caliber that 16 million deaths, more deaths than what we could literally not even think about it. And I want you to imagine just how evil that is, because evil is the absence of truth. And the reason why the media wants to be the media is so that they could just ignore truth or omit it. And that frames a new narrative, absent truth, where you don't have to lie. The lie just becomes the truth, just like the devil wants to substitute God's truth with his truth. It's almost a satanic phenomenon. So when you have Fox News, look, Roger Ailes' goal was not to be conservative. His sole goal was to not include conservatives at the loss of liberals. His goal was to have airtime 50% of the time conservatives and 50% liberal. I mean this. This is honest. He would get so angry when they said, this is conservative network. All he was doing was giving equal time to representatives of 55% of the audience by including them with the liberal audience that most CNN and NBC, because Roger wanted to have the entire audience. He wanted to have conservatives and liberals. No sane programmer programs to the exclusion of any audience. They program to the inclusion. And if the inclusion of 55% of the audience means you exclude 5% on the extremes, that's a great trade-off, right? So Roger did not want to exclude liberals. He actually timed Hannity and Combs. If you actually break it down, interviews with liberals, break it down. It's 50% liberal airtime. And he would fly into rages when they would call him conservative, because he was personally conservative and loved America. But Fox News was fair and balanced. It was not a gimmick. And that's why it resonated.
Yeah, Hannity and Combs, I loved that. Now, I always thought Hannity was better, I'm sure, confirming my own bias, but I always was like...
I syndicated Alan Combs for Roger. Roger asked me, will you please syndicate Alan Combs on radio? I said, that's a suicide mission.
Yeah, because it's not, yeah.
And he said, well, I want you to do it. I said, I'll do it for you, Roger, because you're my friend, but I'm known as the guy that syndicates all the big syndicated shows other than Rush. And people will put him on. I says, but I have some conditions. He says, what? I said, let me think about it for a couple of days. So I went back and I said, I come up with a show for Alan. He says, what is it? It's called Fox News Live with Alan Combs on radio. He says, why? I says, because it's very newsy. And it doesn't play to his politics. It plays to his ability to deliver fast-breaking news with Fox assets. And all I want Alan to do is be an honest liberal. That's it.
Right.
What's an honest liberal? If you're wrong, you will admit it. Right? Because liberals play a very important role. Honest liberals play a very important role in making conservatives a little kinder. Right?
Yeah.
But they only play that role if they can be respected as honest and not political.
Mm-hmm.
So I need you to be, and I says, what do you mean? I says, well, here's how I'm going to get your audience. Ready? This is a funny story. I wrote up a 9-page thing for Roger on how I was going to do this. I says, you have to be the type of liberal that a conservative Republican major general that was chief of staff under Reagan with 9 sons, all in the military, all Republicans, could sit at a Thanksgiving dinner dating the sole daughter that they all love. And at the end of that dinner, say, I don't agree with his politics, but I like that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a tall order, but yeah.
I said, no, but that's how you're going to have to train. And that's how you're going to, I said, Alan, if you can't do it, it's called Fox News Radio with Alan Combs, because it will be called Fox News Radio with Joe Schmo if you don't. Because the show's not going to go away. I don't build shows that get canceled. If I'm going to do this and you don't do it right, I'm going to have to tell them. I says, it won't work, and I'll put somebody, and I'll just make it a flat news show. Okay. So what I did is I says, here's how we're going to do it. First show, I had Ted Nugent in the green room with Janine Garofalo.
Oh, yeah.
These two normally should kill each other in a street fight, right?
Right.
Ted Nugent, the hunter, with the rock star conservative hunter, and Janine, the screaming crazy liberal. But in the green room, these people act like buddies. So we go on the air. Alan's there. The show starts. First show, I somehow get him syndicated using a formula I'll tell you later if you want. And the light goes green, and these two go at each other like they went from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde. And Alan loses control of the show. And I say, Alan, go to break. You got to take control of the show. So anyway, that's the first show. It's a crazy story. But the point is, as I says, here's the rule. I am going to get you to address some things, Alan, that liberals cannot defend. He says, okay. I says, you're a Jew. My father's a Jew. I says, PETA People for Ethical Treatment of Animals have compared Kentucky Fried Chicken to Hitler with the chicken holocaust. Are you aware of that? This is true. I mean, it's funny, but Kentucky Fried Chicken is committing a chicken holocaust. I think that's offensive to every person that died and was murdered by communism and Nazism, which is just a refined version of communism. I want to know if you can defend that, because I think you're Meshuggah, using a Yiddish word, if you believe that's defendable. He says, well, I don't. I says, then what I want to do is I want you to pop the topic, and I want you to disagree with liberals on why they should not defend it and why they erode their credibility by defending it, and why that's the extreme that makes conservatives distrust and even dislike them. And conservatives are going to hear you say that because it's true. Truth has a ring to it that resonates. And even if they don't like you, Alan, even if they disagree with you, they start to like you because they see you're honest. And if you're liberal and honest, you can also be honestly wrong about things. And people could disagree with you, but don't degrade them because they disagree. So I'm going to set up a topic for you, and I'm going to show you how you're going to handle topics so we can get a liberal ratings from conservative listeners on conservative talk radio. So I don't look like I'm insane for syndicating you for Roger. So he says, I says, first topic, I'm going to have you on with PETA. I want you to disagree with him, and I want you to accuse him of making conservatives dislike liberals by being so nuts. Can you do that? He says, I will. I says, and then I'm going to let some crazy liberal callers call through, and I'm going to let them attack you viciously. And they're going to tell you horrible things. And I want you to take it in a dignified manner. And then conservative callers are going to call in, and I'm going to have them defend you.
Right.
And they're going to tell you how gracious you've been, because you would literally be acting like a Christian.
Right.
I'm not trying to make you do this. I'm telling you, no eye for an eye. Take it, because if you don't take it, if you defend yourself, Alan, you'll have no reason for conservative callers to call in and defend you and like you. And
yeah, it's
we
turn
are
the
at
other cheek.
Thanksgiving dinner. Watch this. We're at Thanksgiving dinner, and those brothers and that general, in order for you to marry that daughter, need to like you while disagreeing with your politics. And if you can do that, you will get ratings, because people will feel at least they have an honest broker on the other side whose true opinion they can get to discern exactly what is reasonable from the other side and what is not. And you need to be signal of liberalism, not noise. You need to be the signal of the intent of classic liberalism, not the noise of politics and anger and grievance around it. And that will make you acceptable and loved by both audiences. And so we did it. And he went after, in a very concerned tone, based on the legitimate reality of Holocaust deaths, which is very personal to me and him, but him especially, and saying how offensive that is to him. And then crazy liberal callers, we let them out the gate. They attacked him brutally. It went on and on. The lights started lining up for conservatives, and we got the most articulate conservatives. And here's what call after call was. Alan, I disagree with everything you say. And on Hannity and Combs, I have hated you. But I've seen a new side of you tonight that is reasonable and fair. And I got to tell you, the callers that are calling in are doing themselves a disservice, because you are the first liberal that ever gave me hope for liberals. You are the first liberal that gave me hope for a dialogue, that there might be a dialogue, that with the division of our country might be healed if we could just talk and learn how to speak to each other. And 10 conservative callers in a row said this. And I went on to do that with 10 other topics exactly the same way as a programming strategy. But also, it was purely Christian. And I didn't tell Alan that at the time. I was teaching him to reserve the reaction, to not go eye for eye, to not do what I was raised to do, which is go on the defense immediately, create an offensive strategy to overcome the argument. No. Just be honest. Don't impugn motives. And then you provide a free environment to air views in the marketplace of ideas. I don't want to take too much. I mean, I don't know if this is boring to you or not.
No, it's a fascinating story. I always wonder what happened to Alan Colmes, because, Hannity and Colmes became Hannity, right? And I knew he had a radio show
Yeah, he passed away. I was invited to his wedding. Monica Crowley's sister is who he married. And I was invited to his wedding. And he was the biggest liberal syndicated show in the country. So I actually have that credit too.
There you go. You've done it. I still remember, I think after the 2000 election when George W. Bush won, that the Democrats concluded, at least for a little while, that the reason that Bush won was because of talk radio. And then they tried to create their own like radio. I think it was called Air America or something, wasn't it?
Yes, it was Air America.
And they were going to, they signed Garofalo.
They called me. They all came to me in the end because I did want to help them. And I'll tell you why I wanted to help them. Because I felt radio was a community and we had a sort of a moral obligation to help fellow competitors. And when they heard that I had that openness, they called me. I think it was not Gloria Steinem, it was Allred, and then the other one. And they said, why would you help us? I said, because if I actually block you out of the marketplace of ideas, I am the biggest hypocrite in the world. And just like the motion picture arts, the Oscars, all the actors work together to even help retired actors that have fallen on hard times. I want to help executives and hosts that didn't save their money get pensions. And I want to see you guys succeed. I said, I'll do it for free. But here's the bottom line. I need you to tell people that I sincerely not only said I'd help you, but that I did. Because if you fail, it's because you failed because you're not entertaining and your ideas are not interesting. Not because somebody like me or conservatives blocked you out. You live or succeed based on whether you add value, whether you create an emotionally deep, powerful experience and make people want to be part of people's lives every day, where you relieve the tension of their life, give them a laugh, make their life better, bring perspective, create a cathartic experience that validates the things they can't put into words themselves, but you are like an emotional outlet for them, expressing how they feel in ways they can't, that does them a deep emotional service, that makes them feel part of community. I says, if you can do that for liberals, then that's an audience I'm never going to get. So you're not competing with me, number one. And number two, if you can do it well, you can represent them better than the nutcases that they have, the communists that they actually have representing them. You could represent a more sincere portion of the American liberal that we need. We need honest liberals because liberals make us kinder. Liberals used to be more Christian, right? And conservatives used to be business and it's all business, right? Now the
at
business
least that was the
people are the
stereotype.
Christian. Yeah, but now the business people, what you realize, unless you run your business by Christian principled and principle-centered leadership, you have no future. And the only companies that actually survive are those that are grounded in foundational Christian ethics from the very start. When I help build companies, and because I build the part of companies that face the market, that grow market share at a speed of 5 or 10 times the speed of any other company, just because I understand how to grab news cycles and get hundreds of millions of dollars of free marketing in months instead of years, using what I did to build giant audiences. And I actually did this with Roger because together we would move national polling stuff. We would do things to sort of counter the evil standard media narrative that created such word of mouth referral that it would make sort of amazing things happen in a good way for our country and for our intellectual and emotional freedom. But anyway, I lost my point. I had a brain fart.
Well, you made such a good point about the business side and the foundational principles, which I was going to be a great segue to another question I had. But I can't skip over and not ask you about helping Andrew Breitbart because you referenced it earlier. And again, another giant in the space that we were sad to lose him. And I thought you might want to share about that because, him connecting with Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring, and you see how that has transpired. Again, another giant that helped others succeed and grow from that. And so, how do moments like that come together?
Yeah.
Well, Andrew used to work for Matt Drudge. A lot of people I don't know how many people know this, but he actually
only nerds like us know that.
Yeah. So he called me one day. I don't remember how I met him, but I've known him for a long time. He always seemed like a surfer dude friend of mine. And it was just sort of lovely. We'd go to Disneyland with our families together. And he calls me one day. He says, Mark, I want to leave Matt. I want to start
Mhm.
something called Big Hollywood. And Big Hollywood, Andrew had a love for motion pictures and the TV and movie business. He was also a conservative, but he was just a California cool, wonderful, sweet, idealistic, creative, courageous soul, right? And he also formed Friends of Abe with Gary Sinise. And I was one of the early members of Friends of Abe, which was Friends of Abe was a derivative of Friends of Dorothy, which is the term you'd use in the 1930s if you were gay. In Hollywood, you'd say, are you a friend of Dorothy? Which means if you said yes, it means you found another gay person. But conservatives were so abused in Hollywood that Andrew co-created with Gary Sinise, Friends of Abe. And Gary Sinise started using this as a method to validate and reinforce sort of the basic conservative values that we all share for Hollywood. He wanted to it was a wonderfully courageous thing. But they called it Friends of Abe because Abraham Lincoln, right? And they'd say, are you a friend of Abe? And they started having these dinners, which Andrew would host, and he'd bring together 30 or 40 conservative actors and directors. And there were people across the table. I was one of the first 30. I went to 3,200, right?
Wow.
I was one of the first 30 that he brought into this. And this was before Breitbart. And I would be sitting there, and I remember I was there. Kirk Benedict, who was Face Man on the A-Team and Starbuck on the original Battlestar Galactica, is a friend of mine. And the guy that played Mad Dog Murdoch on A-Team, these were both conservatives. And A-Team was Reagan's favorite show, by the way. It was the top-rated show on NBC. People don't know.
It's one of my favorites, yeah.
And they never talked about it. They didn't even want him talking with affiliates because they were so ashamed of it, but it was the number one show. And so Schultz, his name was Schultz, I had him fill in for some of my big talk shows because he was a great conservative fill-in. And we were sitting across the table where I took him to dinner, Kurt, Benedict, and Dwight Schultz. And there are people at that dinner, and I see Dwight Schultz crying. This is, Mad Dog Murdoch. He's crying. And the other guy across the table is crying. I'm like, what are you crying for? And he leans in my ear. He says, I've worked with that guy for 35 years, and we've never talked politics because I thought he didn't think like me. Now, I want you to think about what that means. There were people that would cry at every Friends of Abe dinner. Every one. People in Hollywood, if you had Christian or conservative values, you were literally like an outcast. That's like being a conservative in a communist, an American in a communist country. And Andrew created this network of all these conservative Hollywood stars that grew into include Kelsey Grammer, Tom Selleck, Greg Gutfeld in his earlier form when he was still forming at 2 feet tall. I'm just joking. He was there. I could have syndicated him, but I said I didn't. That was one I was really wrong about. But there was people from the TV show Lost. There was all these people, and it grew to 900, and it grew to 1,500, and then people infiltrated it and they shut it down. And Jerry Boring was the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's partner, and he was in charge. Gary asked him to be in charge of it at the request of Andrew. I met Ben Shapiro through Andrew, and I put Ben Shapiro, who worked for me, and Jeremy Boring, who was Andrew's friend, together, and they formed the Daily Wire. So that's another story other than Breitbart. But I'll tell you the Breitbart story real quick and how Fox News created Breitbart.com in 60 days, $1 billion brand in 60 days. Would you like to hear that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yes.
Let's go.
So Andrew calls me one day. He says, I want to leave Breitbart. And no, I want to leave Drudge, and I want to start something called the Hollywood website, Big Hollywood.
Yep.
And he says, I want to hire John Nolte for $69,000 a year starting. And John gets a lot more now, but he's the big conservative Hollywood insider. He says, will you back me? I says, well, yeah, I'll back you. Okay, cool. Good, do it. You're in. So he called me back that night. His father-in-law was a guy named Orson Bean, a very famous comedian who was famous for being the top fill-in for Johnny Carson, 50 fill-ins, I think. And so, or he calls me up, he says, my father-in-law is going to do it. I said, okay, either way, it's fine. Let me help you. Anything I could do. I'm really happy for you to start your own thing. It's cool. So he calls me up 3 weeks later, and he says, James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles have brought to me an 8-part series on Acorn, where they posed as a pimp and she posed as a hooker. And they went to Acorn outlets and they said, will you finance a house of ill repute for sex trafficking 13-year-old Guatemalan prostitutes for us? And he says 8 different locations didn't even blink and offered to falsify and create loans to allow them to run child sex trafficking rings, which is the net effect of it. And my first response is, that sounds unbelievable. What is Acorn? He says, Mark, Acorn's about to get $10 billion of funding passed to fund them. And James has caught them. And I think what Acorn is about might be sex trafficking, but we always thought it was about voter fraud. Funding voter fraud. And he says, Mark, if we can expose the story, we'll deny $10 billion of voter fraud funding to destroy our election system and save the country for another 8 to 10 years. I says, wow, is awesome. I mean, this is the way Andrew thought. Him thinking, I'm not just going to do stories. I'm going to do stories that save the country. Right. I'm going to defund evil.
Well, and that was huge. I mean, that whole thing blew up, and it was huge.
So I remember, was this around 2010 or so? Was that, what was the year
2010
here?
Or 2011,
I think that's right.
So he says, I want Michael Savage worked for me for 14 years. Laura Ingraham worked for me for 11 years. Jerry Doyle. I can go, through all these hosts. And he says, I want to give you the exclusive because you're my friend. And you also have the biggest shows. So even if you weren't my friend, I'd want to give you the exclusive. I says, well, how did you get this audio? And he says, this is not audio. I says, well, why are you calling me? He says, because you're my friend. I want you to have it. I'm offering one exclusive to the Washington Times, John Solomon. Why? He says, well, he's a newspaper. I says, but he's a newspaper and you have video. And I'm a radio guy and I have audio, but you have video, right? He says, yeah. I says, why didn't you call Fox? He says, we did. They turned us down. I says, did you talk to Diane Brandy in legal? He says, well, how do you know her? I says, Roger Ailes, as you know, is my friend. And I deal with Diane on contracts all the time outside of me running my own company when I'm doing special projects for them. He says, well, Diane Brandy said that the story wasn't vetted legally. I says, well, was it? He says, Larry Soloff, his partner, who is now the CEO of Breitbart. He says, Larry's a lawyer. And by the way, Larry was a liberal, but Larry had known Andrew since 4th grade and they were best friends. And Larry loved Andrew like a brother. And Larry is a liberal who runs Breitbart to honor the memory of his friend and Susie Breitbart, who is still his partner, along with the Mercer family, right? But Larry had vetted these stories. And I says, so why isn't Diane doing this? He says, well, it appears someone has called them and told them that the stories aren't right. We found out it was another conservative source, guys. I'm not going to say who.
Hey, business owners, did you know there's 76.5 million faith-based and conservative consumers that are looking to support brands that align with their values?
That's a $5 trillion opportunity, and if you're not tapping into it, you're leaving money on the table. Our new book, Liberty Spenders, is your ultimate guide to reaching this influential audience using conviction-driven marketing.
That's right. We break down real-world strategies that successful brands are using right now to connect with this audience authentically, build trust, and drive long-term business growth.
So if you're truly serious about standing out in today's crowded market, grab your copy today on Amazon or visit libertyspenders.com. And don't miss out on this revolutionary strategy called conviction-driven marketing. Hi, everyone. Kurt and Kristen here, your hosts. And today we want to take a moment to talk to you about something that really matters and is near and dear to our hearts.
We're talking about Clarity, which is a nonprofit, pro-life organization that's making a real difference in the lives of women.
Clarity is all about providing hope to women who are facing unplanned pregnancies. And they have a simple message that's powerful. You matter.
And they back it up with action. Clarity offers vital services, things like pregnancy services, ultrasounds, and counseling, all provided at no cost. It's really about giving women the support they deserve.
And I know after you hearing that, you're wondering, how can I help? The answer is clear. Your tax-deductible gift can have a tangible impact. Just $35 provides a life-saving ultrasound, giving a woman crucial information and a chance to make an informed decision.
Think about that. $35. It's amazing. So we're asking you to please join us in supporting Clarity. Let's work together to bring help, hope, and healing.
And here's the important part. You can give today at claritycares.org/donate. That's claritycares.org/donate.
Do it today.
You know why? It wasn't, I'm not going to say who it is, but it was a conservative source poisoning the well for one of the biggest stories that actually, in my opinion, saved 2 election cycles from voter fraud. It was a conservative media competitor that didn't want Andrew to get that growth.
Yeah.
And when
I was going to say, did they want to
to
break the story instead? I mean,
they wanted to break. This was a person that wanted to break the story through their outlet, and he didn't want the audience to go to Andrew's unique outlet. You see, greedy, short-sighted, unchristian behavior in a sense. Really not wanting the best. C.S. Lewis says, "Love is wanting the highest and best good for another." No love in that. The highest and best good is for Andrew to take the work he's done with James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles and to benefit from it under his own brand nameplate, which was brand..Com. That was being sabotaged, and I discovered it in real time. So I got mad, and I called Roger Ailes, and I said, Roger, Diane, there's a story that could save this country from 2 cycles of voter fraud. He says, what is it? Immediately, I didn't even tell him the story. I told it in reverse order about what Acorn was, what they really do, but we discovered them financing sex trafficking rings for underage prostitutes. It wasn't real. It was an undercover investigation, but we have the video on it, and it's been vetted by an attorney, and Diane has turned it down because some other conservative media outlet that wanted the exclusive wanted to poison the well with Fox. He said, why? I said, they don't care about Fox getting good ratings from it. They care about Fox attributing the story to Andrew and his new Breitbart.com. And I want the reverse to happen. I'm willing to give you the exclusive at Fox, to give you 2 to 4 weeks of the best ratings Fox has ever had, if you will attribute everything to Andrew Breitbart and Breitbart.com. And I will help him build his brand in 2 months to have value that it will retain for 30 years. And that was something that he deserved because he's that type of person that never looked for the money, never looked for the fame. And he is one person that should have it because he never wanted it. And Roger said, well, tell me more. And I explained all the things about what happened. And I says, Roger, it's going to be very painful, the first 2 videos. And I need you to prepare for it. He says, well, okay, explain. He says, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to release the first Acorn video in DC. And they're going to attack Fox as racist, a brutal, sick, evil. And you're going to have to not defend yourself. Fox cannot defend itself for 2 days. And it's going to be, and what we hope is there's going to be a lot of criticism, Fox. He says, why? I says, we want a lot of criticism. We want you to be abused for 2 days because then we're going to release the second video of a different location where the sex trafficking has nothing to do with race. It's just sex trafficking. And we're going to start sorting out the noise from the signal. I didn't say it this eloquently. Okay. This is better than I said.
Well, but you had more information.
Yeah.
So it was strategically, this is how we're going to lay it out.
So the second video, which will be 3 days later, will validate that this was not an isolated incident. The attacks against Fox will end that day. And then they will start to question whether this is a cultural phenomenon within Acorn or if there's just 2 bad apples, which is now has to stop the criticism of Fox. He says, okay. I says on Friday of that week, we'll release the 3rd video showing the 3rd location unrelated to the other 2 also agreed to finance housing and financial support to enable child sex trafficking of grandma and prostitutes. And by the 4th video, everyone at Acorn that is doing this is going to be fired. And by the 5th video, Fox is going to start to be looked at as having been unfairly accused. And by the 6th video, Fox will start to become the leader in exposing investigative reporting. And by the 8th video, Fox will have achieved the highest moral authority over the topic to discuss the political ramifications of giving $10 billion to this organization if it would do something like this. And Acorn will be defunded. And we will save the next 2 election cycles. We will not be paying for election fraud. And he said, I'll do it. I said, start Monday morning with Fox and Friends. I'll prep Andrew for the interview. All I want is attribution for Breitbart.com. He said, okay. That value that Roger did created an echo chamber that went far beyond Fox. It required, in the first video release, CNN to pay attention to Fox and try to make Fox the story. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to get earned media. I wanted to draw the audiences of other media companies into Fox, in addition to Fox's audience. And then for those other audience to discover that the person who sent them there was lying to them, leaving them to stay loyal to the people that were wrongly accused. Does that make sense? So that radically increased Fox's audience, because the same thing I said about Combs goes for Fox. If Fox can also be intellectually honest and admit when it's wrong to liberals start to say, I don't like conservatives, but I sort of like that guy, like they did with Rush. Liberals sort of liked Rush. Did you know that 2/3 of Rush's audience were not conservative? I'm not saying they were liberal. 1/3 was conservative, 1/3 were independents, and 1/3 were liberal.
Now, see, I absolutely wouldn't have guessed that.
The core Republicans, the core conservative audience that listened to most talk shows only represented 20% of his audience.
Well, he was so entertaining.
There's a reason for it. He had love. He literally didn't hate liberals. He wanted the highest and best good for them, as C.S. Lewis says, what love is. That's Christian love. Rush genuinely wanted the highest and best good for liberals and conservatives. And there was something in his tone and the warmth and the humor he had, which was never cruel. His humor towards liberals was never making fun of them, only except when the Meshuggah ones, the crazy ones, he would go after. But he really converted so many liberals into conservatives by just having love, Christian love. And that's what people loved. They loved the Christ, the sort of the Christ-centered energy that Rush came from, because it fed something good in them. It gave their spirit and essential minerals and spiritual nutrients that they lacked in their work and their everyday life. There was something about Rush that was totally Christian, right? And it gives me chills to talk about it. But that, back to Fox, that story that Andrew launched the career of one other person, launched the career of Glenn Beck. Why? Because when Andrew launched that story, Glenn Beck quickly realized no one was breaking down the backstory. So he took out his black chalkboards. And Roger only got Glenn Beck to play defense against CNN's programming strategy. They had Glenn Beck, and they were moving Glenn Beck, who was a rising star at CNN, into primetime. And Roger did not want Beck in primetime against the 4 hours that represented 80% of Fox's audience, which was 6 to 10. 80% of that audience is 4 hours a night. Never forget it. It's where their money is. So what networks will do is they'll pluck a great talent from another network as a defensive play to hide them in an earlier day part outside of primetime, but put them in a bullpen. If they have to renegotiate with one of their primetime hosts, they have a backup that gives them negotiating power in contract negotiations. That's the way it works.
When you're explaining this strategy and talking with Roger Ailes and setting this up for Breitbart, I think it's an amazing lesson that I just wanted to pause for a second, because as you were describing this, I was thinking about the strategy, right? The business perspective. Okay, the strategy of this, the storytelling arc, and how you're trying to prep all of this, and you're prepping for what the reaction will be.
Anticipating each step.
Right. And that's going to serve. And I think so often, this might feel like an aside, so sorry, listeners, but
no, please. I've been yapping too much. I apologize.
I think so often, people of faith, we want to do the right thing, and we know to tell the truth and to be honest and be truth tellers. And I think there's wisdom in this too, and there is a part of, I think when you're making these business decisions and you're thinking about the strategy, because God calls us to be wise, right? And so you're anticipating how this is going to unfold. And I just think there's a beautiful lesson in that for people to absorb, I think, from what you just described. And it's incredibly brilliant. And it's set, there's so many wins right there. So when you're going to him and saying, hey, this is going to help you, this is helping him, I can see, you're seeing how the different chess pieces play. And that's a huge lesson in negotiating. It's a huge lesson in relationship building, rapport, making sure you're seeing how this can serve each person. You were coming, I think, I'm sure Roger felt perhaps like you were asking for a favor, but it wasn't really. I mean, it's.
No, I actually showed how it would increase his ratings to new heights. He would be able to hijack the audiences of other networks by setting them up to misjudge him. You know what I mean? When they discovered they misjudged him, Fox becomes the truth teller, and their network becomes the liar that caused them to falsely judge Fox, which forces any reasonable liberal to give Fox a second chance and be open that they might be okay. Right?
Yeah, because they jumped the gun, right? They're making presumptions. They're already doing that, and that shows they're not taking this seriously and vetting and properly getting the facts. And so, what I think, I'm not being very eloquent here, but I just think, when we talk about Liberty spenders in our audience, and we talk to business owners about leaning into this strategy, leaning into your values, right? Whether those be conservative values, Christian values, and using that in your marketing. And I think what you've described is just so brilliant in understanding how people will come to your aid, how these things can work for your good.
Would you like me to explain how I applied that strategy that built Breitbart.com? Same strategy that built Daily Wire, very similar. And they did that they did that. I just put them together. Ben worked for me as my chief compliance officer, Ben Shapiro. And I just thought these were lovely guys who put them together, but they did all that on their own. They get 100% credit. I put them together, yes, but I did really create the awareness for the Breitbart brand, because here's two things you need to understand. There's no amount of money you can spend, even on the most brilliant AI target marketing, that will ever build you a national brand. You just can't spend enough paid marketing. The only marketing you can create to create a brand like a Breitbart or consumer brands, like Steve Jobs did when he created the 1984 commercial that he bought for the Super Bowl. It aired, I think, one time. He created that to create a controversy where every television network for free would have to play the commercial to discuss the controversy surrounding it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So he made it known that he paid the top rate for the Super Bowl ad to air it one time, which became a story of itself. Because if you limit access to something, more people want to see it.
Right.
And what did he get? He got networks to play that freaking commercial 1,000 times for free. That's called earned media. What Trump did in 2016, in the first quarter of 2016, I believe, Trump generated $1.3 billion in earned media cash equivalent with an ad spend of $75 million outlay. Hillary, or as Savage would call her, Hitlary Clinton. That's what Savage used to call her. I used to laugh every time. Hillary Clinton spent $300 million on paid marketing. Trump spent 25% as much, but because Trump knew how to create rating spikes during television broadcasts at networks, on local affiliates, at events, he did what I call a fair trade. And the fair trade is, hey, I'm going to trade you ratings. I'm going to spike your ratings if you don't charge me for covering it. So imagine you get 5 minutes on a television broadcast. What would you have to pay CBS for that? $1 million? So imagine all you have to do is figure out how to be entertaining, or not entertaining, present common sense concepts in an entertaining way to spike the ratings. And then all the television networks, they're looking at the minute by minute Nielsen's. And when they see a blip, they send their producer out to find what was on that other channel when that blip occurred. Because word of mouth occurred. Somebody called a friend and said, you got to watch, Trump's on. So people called each other, for Trump's on. The ratings blip spiked. And Trump knew that would multiply his rating. If he could get spikes on one, he can create rating spikes. And all the other networks were watching their minute by minute of all of each other. And all of them would set up appointments. And then in every market he went in, he would get millions of dollars of earned media for free. He didn't have to pay for. Musk does the same by creating news stories about his technology, or in fact, he bought 12 of the biggest aluminum presses in the world. He converts that into an earned media event 1,000 times it's that you could never pay for. Even if you could pay for it, it wouldn't be as effective as if it wasn't legitimately interesting. So Trump used earned media to underspend and outperform and win in 2016 by using earned media. And I use that for my clients. So what I will do with my clients is I will simply break down what their strongest point is. I'll find the greatest strength. I'll find the greatest weakness in their strength. I'll find the greatest strength of their competitor, and I'll find the greatest weakness inside the strength of their competitor. And I'll try to find a way to redefine a smaller space that they can own the entire narrative market space over. If you're going into a warfare battle, you have to have air superiority first, correct? Air superiority is defined by controlling the thought leadership in any given sector. If you are a tooth machine lathe manufacturer, and you want to be the dominant tooth machine lathe manufacturer, you had better own all of the news surrounding innovations for teeth manufacturing. And you have to be the reporting. You have to cover all the reporting for career advancement for the executives who want to read about that. You have to have little videos on best practices to show you're the thought leader and standard bearer. But then you have to find something more once you've established the narrative airspace in order to make it stick and to destroy any chance of another competitor coming in. You have to find a way to champion something good and noble that you have to find there's a problem with and solve it for the entire space. That makes you the leader. And then involve the competitors, in a collaborative effect to create standards for that industry, which once again is innately Christian. Think about it. By creating a president's circle where you all agree as competitors to compete fairly, maybe create joint ventures and alliances, combining your capital together. You're expanding the pie. Because in most things, people are so selfish in being unchristian that they don't realize. When I've analyzed media companies, guys, these companies, the people that tried to sabotage Breitbart because they wanted the exclusive to come through their outlet, instead of being happy for him and blessing him, they tried to rob that from it. But I analyzed that space. Did you know that there's only 6 million paid subscribers between all conservative media outlets? 6 million. At $9 a month, right? You know how many conservative subscribers there are in the United States that could consume Breitbart or Daily Wire or Epic Times? It's like 100 million.
I was going to say, our model is 76 and a half.
Right.
So,
but watch this. But 76 and a half. But of the 100 million, how many could afford $9.95 a month for a subscription conservative news service like Daily Wire, for instance? Let's say 50 million. Let's say half could. Out of 50 million, 6 million represents 12% of the total achievable market. And what I told some of my big media clients is, why do you even care about no matter how big the others are, what leads you to have any reason to ever compete with them? Because there's still 88% of these people are still underserved. In other words, if you never thought about any conservative magazine, newspaper, TV show, talk show, nothing. You just sold your subscription. If you could do something better, more organic, more thoughtful, faster, more helpful, finance creating, value adding, there's 44 million people that no one's asked to join yet. And you're fighting over 6 with 5 other conservative outlets? Are you crazy? Guys, I want you to think about this. Exists in most spaces. Most spaces, everybody's so focused on each other with ego battles. This is where I get to ego flu. Ego battles. I'm not going to let him get me. Why even think about him? Most of these spaces have 80% of available market, some of them 50%. You don't have real competition until 100% of a total market is spoken for. A lot of conservative and Christian services, 90% of the audience is available still. It's like Fox News doesn't exist. What Roger did for serving an underserved audience with news consumers, every Christian business you have does not realize that just by using principle-centered leadership and core principle ethics and not necessarily Christianizing a secular company, but just by modeling Christian behaviors through that secular company, you create profoundly beautiful relationships. And they're blessed. Because when you follow a virtuous path, as it was, I think it was Sun Tzu said, that blessings come as the result of following a virtuous path. The virtuous path is not to get rich. The virtuous path is not to dip your toe off that path into sin, ambition, greed, pride, ego, so that you don't poison the blessing for your company. But let's assume that's the type of customers I like to work with. I like to help them because I think those are beautiful cultures. What I do is I go out and I say, let's establish your media structure, because the only way we're going to build your brand 10 times bigger, 10 times faster is by establishing standards that are Christian-based standards, based in Christian, Judeo-Christian ethics. And then we're going to own all the air superiority over that space. And when we own that air superiority, we're going to move our ground ships in, and then we're going to use paid marketing, but not before. Because our paid marketing has to be tested in modeling, where we do 5% of the spend, do 10 different test spends, spend $5,000 on 10 different AI plans. One of them is going to generate 90% of the response. We're going to take that. We're going to go large with that when we pay for advertising. But first of all, we're going to establish the narrative arc, because we are going to trap our competitors to live within a narrative environment we designed and control completely. But we're not going to use it to hurt them. We're going to do it benignly to help the entire industry. And we're going to enlist the help of our competitors that are ethical to ally with us to fix the entire industry and to drop the costs for the working poor for our services.
Yeah.
And still make the same amount of money. Why can, think about it, why can Mazda and Toyota joint venture on creating a engine? They don't look at each other as enemies. They look at each other the way Deming would want them to look at each other, as potential allies. Their CapEx is half as much if they both spend half the CapEx. So what I do for companies is, once I establish that, I turn their top people and train them into be thought leaders so they can get the number one position on CNBC, Fox News, and then we create newsletters, marketing tools to get to every decision letter and every customer, but every single M&A prospect that my company wants to acquire, my client wants to acquire in the future. Why? Because through becoming the news leader, through building a media division inside that sits over your brand, which sits over your entire niche, that forces your competitors to exist within it, by inviting those competitors to contribute and profiling them honorably, reporting on the breakthroughs. I know this is going to sound crazy, of your competitors. It speaks to your confidence, how good you are, that you can honor them. Yeah. And it invites them to a table. And guess what it does? It tees up mergers and acquisition conversations years before you need to have them. Because a day comes and you want to go public. You can go to every competitor you've treated right, that you've collaborated with, and they will give you a better deal because they trust you, they like you, and they already see you lead them. And you've never disrespected them. All on Christian principles. Every bit, no manipulation. And I could do it manipulatively if I wanted to, but that would be me mimicking Christian principles, not doing them. You have to have a true intent to want the highest and best good for another, as C.S. Lewis would say. And if I could figure out a way to do the highest and best good for my competitor is for me to own them. I know that sounds like a justification, but let's say the highest and best good for my competitor is for me to honor them, never outcompete them, always show them why I could do things better, cheaper, faster. Maybe I could show them how to help too. But my competition isn't going to come from a place of cruelty or malevolence. It'll be from just doing it better, faster, and cheaper, and the consumer deciding. I will never talk negatively about my competitor. I will only talk positively about what mine does different and more. So you set up an environment for profound market share growth inside of that, the biggest thing, which is your media division, defining control. And inside of that bubble, you've set up a profound market for air superiority narrative that allows you to start to spend highly tested marketing campaigns, converting leads into customers. You've set up a profound strategy for recruiting the top executive talent out of your best competitors. And best of all, you've already set up a strategy for mergers and acquisitions far in advance of the day you'll need them. So that's what I do for companies.
I think that's a good, sort of almost pause point. I have about 2/3 of what I wanted to talk to you about that we're not going to get to today, but we're going to get a promise from you while you're live that we can get you back on the show because
as long as I'm not boring anybody, I'm fine. It's either talking to my wife or talking to you, and she would prefer I talk to you probably.
I'm riveted by all of this, and I there were several of these cow paths I would have wanted to go even deeper on because I'm absolutely fascinated about it.
Welcome to explore it. I'm available to explore whatever you want.
Yeah.
So this is like genius.
This is gold. There's a lot of good business stuff here, and we still haven't gotten deeper into some of the other topics. But we're coming up on an hour and 15 minutes. So I want to do.
Whoa.
Yeah,
I didn't
believe it or not.
Sorry.
I know.
I apologize.
No, nothing to apologize for.
Me? We are.
I was surprised. I looked up at the clock thinking, okay, we probably got 30 minutes in. And but that's a good sign because I was fascinated by all you were sharing. But I wanted to do real quick to kind of wind up this. We're going to call this what? Episode 1? Part 1 here. We want to end part 1 with our lightning round. So we always love to ask each person, what's the legacy that they'd like to leave behind from their business and some of those big projects that you're talking about that you've been up to?
I think for me, I had all the success I ever would have wanted in life. I went from owning a big real estate company I built from nothing to owning the biggest independent network in the country and owning part of a big television company that did a lot of neat things. And you know what? None of it meant anything. Not a darn thing. Magazine covers, meeting presidents, princes and kings. I didn't meet a king. I'm going to take that back. What? You will be king. But it didn't mean anything because I was so emotionally distant from my wife and children at the top of that. And I prayed to God at a certain point, I would trade all of this if I could just have them. And I couldn't because I wasn't a Christian. I thought I was a Christian, but I was not a Christian. I was a fan of Christ. There's the difference. When you become a Christian, if you love him, you have to do what he says. Not just say you're a Christian and have what I call guilt-free sin. It's like fat-free cheesecake. Guilt-free sin. Hey, become a Christian. You can have guilt-free sin. It's great. You can just do all the horrible things in the world you want. You don't have to feel bad about it. No, that's not what Christ didn't come to save us from guilt about sin. He came to save us from sin. And when you think about what that means to me, I'm like, I have always justified myself by being a really sort of Boy Scout ethically. I'm with the same woman I met when I was 17. She's still beautiful and I still love her. And she's put up with a stupid ego in me for way too long. But God took it from me. Christ found me in my heart because I almost died of a heart problem and made me reevaluate my life. And when I think about legacy, my legacy is that God gave them a decent dad and my wife a decent husband because he loved me enough to separate me from what separated me from him. And what separated me from him was the fact I got my identity from my smarts. I got my identity from the approval of my dad. I got my identity from the approval, and I didn't feel like I did, but I really did, right? I never thought I did. I always thought of myself as sort of a Captain Kirk sort of pioneering, Charlton Heston and Shatner were like my favorite icons as a kid. I just thought Kirk is the ultimate American and Charlton Heston is the ultimate religious figure. I didn't really factor Jesus in really there too much, even though my father talked about him. My father was also a fan. And so what I was sort of a Sanhedrin, sort of old school Old Testament guy that sort of thought I could save myself from deeds and from behavior and from overperforming. I became smart. I have a form of high functioning autism, which is very beneficial for my clients, but it makes me miss social cues. It makes me too candid sometimes. It makes me hurt feelings. And it's something that makes you very humble, because you realize that if you miss something, if you have sort of an inability to process emotion in a certain way, or it hits you too late, you have to start becoming more humble. And I did that for a long time, but it wasn't until Christ found me, after he had separated me from the identity that I got that made me feel secure, which is I'm super smart. I can do anything I put my mind to. And I've always been able to do that. I just love to work. My wife thinks, where's the pay? I'm like, I don't even think about it because it's so fun. And I learned how to enjoy this sort of, Elon Musk has that sort of thing with engineering, but I have this with business creation, business strategy, and how to explode things as far as market share that makes companies 10 to 100 times more valuable. But I got my identity from it, and I didn't realize that it was a gift, and I took credit for it. But it is a gift. And when I lost it with my heart, and then I took benzodiazepines, which is what Jordan Peterson took. I took them to sleep, but they're for anxiety, and they're a dangerous medication. You could become chemically dependent as little 7 days. Jordan Peterson took them, and he became a zombie for a year. And that happened to me. And when you lose your ability to think, when your whole identity is based on how smart you are, right? And you take benzos and it clogs the receptors, and you have the ability to think maybe like an 8-year-old for a year. God said to me, that stuff that made you so smart, that high functioning autism, whether it is or not, looks like it because I can figure stuff out really fast. He said, that is stuff I blessed you with. You're taking credit for my gifts. They're not yours. They're mine. And I'm putting you in timeout. And there was a loving way he did it that made me realize that I had always made the wrong things important, because my dad loved those and my mom, but my dad more, gave love in return for success and achievement. And I innately knew in my heart that if I was not the most successful, I might not get love. And my dad didn't know he was doing that, but all of my siblings were trained like that. And it was so transactional to be loved that way that I made it part of my life. And I didn't know there was any other way. And I became emotionally vacuous in my relationships with my wife and children. But everything looked right. I did all the right things. But Christ came and gave my family a gift by making me think I only had a year and a half to live, for a year, 2 or 3 years. And when you have and when every day could be your last, you start to have to really be honest with yourself and realize, was I their enemy? No. My ego was their enemy. No wife falls in love with an ego. No child says, I love my dad's ego. My dad's ego is really great for my childhood, right? But all my friends have the same problem. And I started to realize that the first sign of ego flu is dismissiveness and impulsiveness towards your family and colleagues. And if you can clip it early, you can save your company and rebuild your family. And because I had this operation that fixed my heart, 1 in 1,000. I have 30 years left. I decided to give what's rest of my life in legacy to helping mostly Christian or secular companies that adopt Christian ethics, helping them, the good guys succeed, because I made billions of dollars for people that aren't so good.
Yeah.
So that's my legacy. That's what I want to pay forward. And I also think that God, I'm just grateful to God that he let my children and me learn who I was underneath the cultural identity of my childhood, right? And that's what we all are. We're all sort of trapped in a small family culture, and then we start to expand. And as we find Christ, we learn a new identity on him. But my eyes were on mammon. My eyes were on success. My eyes were on market share. My eyes should always be on Christ, period. And then all decisions are based on that. And then you stay on the virtuous path, because if you follow the virtuous path, the only danger is you cannot be a hypocrite. You cannot. And it's not a self-judgment. You just can't dip your toe in sin off that path professionally. In your own life, I'm not talking about that. Professionally, if you consecrate a company to ethics, you better damn well follow it, and you could be more aggressive and make more money. using Christian principles than any other principles, period. Because Dr. Deming solely taught Christian principles, in my opinion, even though he never said it. I can tell. And I learned directly under him. He was the guy that changed Japan into a building quality into the process culture, which we can discuss next time if you'd like.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and it's so true. The gift of that God gives us to have that realization. He gives us He invites us. He gives us that opportunity to slow down and to surrender. And it's hard. We have been through those, different circumstances, but anybody who has been on this faith journey for a while, I'm sure can relate. We have our moments. And we relate to parenting. And so I can absolutely understand that drive for ambition and success, because we're all just trying to somehow prove that we're worthy and that we're good enough to be loved. And this is what Christ gives us, is that there's nothing we could do to earn that. And yet he gives that to us freely.
He does. And before my dad died, I had to sit down with my dad because my dad was a beautiful man. Englishman, beautiful English voice, sounded just like this. He was on the earth for 50. He was on the earth for 55 years, and he spoke with this very warm cadence. And he spoke
that's
about
lovely.
Jesus, and it was just beautiful. I can walk around London, and no one knows I'm quite American. But in the end, he spoke in a very beautiful way, in a very touching, warm voice like this. I could do 50 voices, by the way. But my father's voice was very touching. And the reason why Sean Hannity became a radio show is because Sean listened to my dad. And Sean told my dad that my dad's who inspired him. And Matt Drudge was an ice cream vendor at Disneyland when he would listen to my dad. And my dad inspired him to start the Drudge Report. And he invited me and my dad to Fox in 1996, before Roger ever called me and before I ever knew Roger, to go on the Drudge Report. Monica Lewinsky back in the nose on the next Drudge, right? So there's a lot of these people that have connective tissue to him, but my dad was not a Christian. He wanted to be. He was a fan of Christ, but there was something inside him from his ethnic upbringing that resisted it. And in the last 3 months of his life, I started reading the New Testament with him, because he's a very anti-Christian hypocrisy. He felt that Jews rejected Christ because so many Christians were hypocrites that Jews it turned Jews off. And he wanted to help Jews discover Christ by not using so much Christian terminology that would turn them off, because he did love Christ, but he hadn't necessarily given himself to Christ, right? So in the end, I spent 3 months. I said, Dad, I know you don't like to churchianity and all that. I get it. I says, but I really want to go through the New Testament with you. And I went through the New Testament and I related all the things Christ did to the Old Testament. And in the end, he did give his life to Jesus Christ at 93, a month before he died. And it's a touching thing. I get chills when I say this because people can think they're Christian and they're not. Why? Yes, you can't do things for deeds, but like if you have a problem with your brother and it's a money thing, you could justify the money thing. But Christ tells us, look, you got to try to work this out. Don't go to court. Maybe you got to eat it. Maybe you got to walk away with a little less. But the drama, he says, work it out. At least you deal with the snares from the judges, right? And the court system is so corrupt. Look what Trump goes through. So corrupt. So it might seem like a sacrifice to give a little less, walk away, turn the other cheek, do what Christ says, but it's so much better. You don't get sucked into the psychopathy of evil and the sickness of the world. You by turning the other cheek, you literally minimize the drama in your life, and life starts being enjoyable because you set the parameters, the boundaries. You require people to observe your boundaries, and you respect theirs. And it allows you to keep that blessing between you and God in about a 3-foot perimeter around you, where you respect other people, but don't accept them coming through your boundary, and you won't violate theirs. And that's the way Christian society should function. And that's even the way businesses should function. Because competitors, because there's so much market share, if competitors would joint venture more often and see the value in each other, instead of fighting, they'd expand the pie 5-fold, and they'd never have to say a negative word about each other. Competitors, if they're good, should say, boy, he's good at this part. She's good at that part. maybe we could JV and create a third company we can own both of and be good at both parts. You expand the pie. So evil has a scarcity mentality, which creates evil ethics. But Christ has an abundance mentality, which means expansion of the pie, which allows involvement and inclusion of even your competitors who you're going to want to buy someday in an M&A play, right? So that's legacy too, because it shows Christians, because guess what your job as a Christian, in my opinion? Your job as a Christian is to bring your principles and be a conduit for the Holy Spirit and modeling Christian behavior to people who are profoundly unchristian. And maybe they're good at business, but they're not Christian. I wasn't. If a Christian would have approached me and said, hey, Mark, you want to join venture? And I got to know him and he behaved like a Christian, didn't say it, just behaved like it. Guess what happened? I became a Christian because in the end, I didn't realize I wasn't one, but one of my clients modeled that for me and I asked them about it. And they helped me realize something I never knew before about Christ that made me see him as real and not have to believe anymore because I know. I don't need to believe in Christ. I know. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's such a good way to end this part one. And we're so excited that you came and joined us, Mark.
Incredible.
Well, honored.
Anybody who listened who wants to get a hold of Mark and maybe build a giant media empire, you can hit him up
or
at
any
Mark.
business. Or any business. I do right? tech. I've got a tech company that's going to be a multiple unicorn, which I've figured out unique solutions for, which are patentable that could change the banking system or banking services. And I do stuff like it. So but not just media, any business, but I could use my media contacts to create that earned media over and force all your competitors to live in the narrative environment you create, because every company in this world with 5 billion potential users on the internet has to become a media company, period. There's no way to pay for the marketing that you need.
You have definitely, yes, we agree with that.
You have to ride the news cycle. You have to become the part of the news cycle, and you have to make, break, and create a serialized news story that you can keep alive 4 to 8 weeks. And if you can keep a story alive, you get attribution, and it creates brands out of nothing. Think about it. The Drudge Report was created from one 8-week story that turned into a 4-month story. Monica Lewinsky. What was it worth when it sold? Breitbart did this day, never broke another story that was as big as Acorn. It created the whole brand overnight. You can do that with a bicycle manufacturer if you understand how to solve the right problem by defining the right set of problems and creating waves in the news cycle that it creates for a compelling, interesting story that people talk about. If you can't do that, if people don't tell their friend about it, you can't make an earned media story out of it. But I fashion these solutions, which are sort of very high level. But I've also built the biggest consumer companies and tech companies from the other side, from the ground up. So I help. My website is markmastersconsulting.com, markmastersconsulting.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I don't remember my LinkedIn address, but there's also another interview on my LinkedIn address where I do talk about ego flu, which we could talk about next time. And just my life story, how I almost died. And it's on markmasters.com too, but it's on my LinkedIn site. So I'm happy to come back and talk about whatever you like. I'd like to, I just want to help Christian business people really understand how valuable Christ's message is if you convert it into company policy and don't talk about the religion, just make it the policy. And you'll find it's what Deming used to save Japan. Deming's built quality into the process is based on asking the right questions. And Jesus always asked the right questions because you can't get the right answers until you ask the right questions. And Deming taught the Japanese how to do this instead of losing face, to be open to being wrong. And to your point earlier, when you said you have to be open to being wrong, I think you said something like that. It's the openness and the vulnerability to not be absolutely certain that takes great character muscles, because a great CEO has to be open to being wrong and recheck their thesis constantly, because you don't want pride to make you firm in a position that could destroy your company. When somebody at the front desk might have more consumer feedback for you that's better than your own vice president. So if you're open to being wrong, you have to stay in a painful state of vulnerability. And that is the price Christ That is the cost Christ gives to us. He says, my burden is light. What's his burden exactly? Feeling vulnerable at all times, but not in a bad way. That's his burden, because certainty is easy. Being open to being wrong and to learning new things, to opening your perspective and learning and listening to others, it takes great strength, because you have to be secure in yourself to take in others without feeling they're stealing your ideas from you. And that is I believe that is the cross. You also have to be long suffering with people that have not been touched yet, have not been called, right? And because they might be at any moment. And maybe it's dependent on you interacting them with grace and kindness and patience. Maybe that's the moment where God reaches through you and the Holy Spirit comes through you to show them a moment of patience where you explain something a little differently that unlocks them. Because most people, you're dealing with trauma, childhood trauma, and they automatically project in the manager or the CEO the role of father. And the operations director they see as mother. And they start having these strange reactions as if to a parent. So when you break that and you start introducing what I call reality prime or adult behavior, you model it through not treating them like a child, not treating them like a subordinate, but treating them with Christian love, wanting the highest and best love for them, purpose for them, by slowing down, explaining, asking questions, showing respect. Look at the way Trump and Elon Musk interact with people. They never look down at anybody. They're always curious, right? If you could put that in company cultures, you can save companies. But if you put that in families, you can fix families. And that's the Holy Spirit. That's what Christ commands us to do and what I want to do for companies, because I think it's better for them. It's not just me inserting my values. It's just better. The New Testament is the operating manual for us, right? For a best life. It enfolds business. It enfolds politics.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure we put those links in the show notes, and I can't wait for part 2. We have so much more to dig in with you, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go back and listen and write down all these lessons. So we thank you so much for joining. Again, you can find him at markmastersconsulting.com. And for those of you listening, we thank you so much for tuning in. We know your time is valuable. If you found value in this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss more in the future. And leave us a review if you're open to it so that more people can find our amazing content and hear from these great guests like Mark. So thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Liberty Spenders Podcast. If you're a business owner, we hope today's conversation gave you valuable insights on how to grow your business.
If you enjoyed the show, do us a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us reach more entrepreneurs and leaders like you who are ready to make an impact.
And write something flattering, because I read them all. Don't forget to grab your copy of Liberty Spenders too, available now on Amazon and at libertyspenders.com. It's packed with proven strategies to help you reach the 76.5 million consumers who are looking for brands that share their values.
We'll see you next time as we continue exploring how to grow your business with purpose and conviction.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode and the one after that.